Keith Knight joins the show to break down his explosive book, Domestic Imperialism, 9 Reasons I Left Progressivism, from taxpayer-funded wars against innocent people abroad to the weaponization of the welfare state at home. Keith exposes how modern progressivism has morphed into a tool for authoritarian control. We talk about endless government spending, the illusion of compassion, and how both political parties use fear to justify violating your rights. This isn't left versus right. It's freedom versus control and how we fight back. Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels. Tell the audience who you are.
My name is Keith Knight. I work at the Libertarian Institute with Scott Horton, who I know you've had a conversation with. He's one of my heroes. I read his book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan in 2017. And my mind was just blown because it was okay to question the war in Iraq, but to question Afghanistan, this is like a holy war. How stupid could this guy be? Doesn't he know we needed to go into Afghanistan and Iraq was the mistake? He lays out the case citing an article in October of 2001 from The Guardian, where he says, the Taliban, they're not a bunch of nice people, but they didn't want a war with the U.S. So they actually offered, this was October 14th of 2001, they offered to hand bin Laden over to the United States in exchange for Bush to not stop dropping bombs on Afghanistan. When I read that, I was so shocked. Even more shocked also when that book...
Hold on. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Is that true?
Yes.
The Taliban?
The Taliban, the guy's name was, he was the deputy prime minister. His name was Haji Abdul Kabir. He said, look, we'll hand bin Laden over to any third party in exchange for proof that bin Laden was behind the September 11th attacks. And the Bush administration said, no, we're not negotiating, because there's such an enticement to go to war because they know they can create all the power and prestige they want when there's an external enemy for the people to hate so much that they'll justify giving the president any amount of power he wants. That's why Bush's approval rating was at 91% after he failed to keep us safe on 9/11. So yes, Afghanistan was also an avoidable war. And we know because Donald Rumsfeld on September 11th of 2001 wrote a memo saying, gather things related and not, see if info good enough to hit SH, Saddam Hussein. Ask PW for details, Paul Wolfowitz. So they were planning the invasion of Iraq on September 11th before one shred of evidence came out about what was happening, and Afghanistan was also in unnecessary war. That is my introduction to the Libertarian Institute. That's what motivated me to get with Scott Horton and advocate these ideas.
Do you know that Scott, I think, was the most censored show I've done?
Interesting.
Yep. I think they pulled the show that Scott did with Dave Smith. I remember him saying, I thought that it got pulled down off of YouTube. And I think he put the whole thing on X. I'm not sure, but I vaguely remember there being an issue there as well.
That seems very likely. Scott is such a risk taker with these things. We had a gentleman on our board of directors, Thomas E. Woods Jr. He said, this whole COVID pandemic needs to be written about, and I want to have a book out on it. And Scott said, we'd love to publish it at the Institute. So Tom's thesis, the book is titled Diary of a Psychosis. He says, all right, we need to lock down the entire country, and people need to walk around wearing masks because it saves lives. Let's test that thesis. So what Tom Woods does in this book is he says, surely, since it's so vitally important that we need to lock people down, we need to stop them from going to work, stop family gatherings, we need to cancel funerals. It's this big because we're saving lives. Surely, if we compare the 25 states in America that had strict lockdowns and the strictest mask mandates versus the 25 states that had the least strict lockdowns and mandates, obviously, we'll just see we'll see tons of death, and then we'll just see, very stable deaths in those other states. And it'll clearly show us
that California would be nominal deaths and Florida would be skyrocketing statistics of death.
We'll also
in
see
theory.
Deaths going up, and then lockdowns and mask mandates instituted, and then deaths going down, 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 down. So first of all, when I heard Tom's thesis, I go, why has that never even occurred to me that we could actually measure this? I go, okay, that's shocking. Tom puts this book together, and the conclusion is there was no noticeable difference between states that had strict mask mandates and strict lockdowns, and states that did not. California and Florida are the two primary examples. But he also goes into places like Sweden, places like Japan, to verify his thesis. So yeah, Scott is always willing to embrace thought crimes and publish books like that. So that's what we do at the Institute.
Wow, I love that term, thought crimes. That's fantastic. I'm going to steal that. Or in fact, I'll credit for you openly. Never mind, considering it's on tape now.
Please do.
You know what's interesting? I was at lunch with my mom yesterday, and we were talking about the COVID vaccine, and I don't want my mom to get it anymore. And there's listen, even still, she's 76, but there are therapeutics now. She's in good health. I don't want her to get it. And she's like, well, but this has stopped the rates of fatality. And I said, let's go and look at the rates of fatality in individuals who contracted COVID starting in 2020. And until you hit 80-year-olds plus, right, which was like 1 point something percent, it's like 0.3%. all the way up to 60 years old, and 70s, like, okay, 0.6% of people in their 70s that got COVID ended up dying from it. And you just remember, like, oh my God, the death rates like through the roof and everybody's dying. And when you go back and you look at the numbers, and then I said, what percentage of these these fatalities, people who died from it, were obese? And it's like 70 something percent. Or 80 plus, or had a significant autoimmune condition. And yet, these thought crimes, the propaganda, the rhetoric, if you had to guess at it, I mean, I'm sure we all have our conspiracy theories. In fact, this is a conspiracy theory YouTube. If you had to guess at it, why do you think people commit these thought crimes?
Why do people commit them? I think sometimes when you get fooled, you feel so personally insulted. Like, think of so many guys in prison committed a violent crime because they first felt insulted. Someone insulted their wife, someone insulted their mother. People are willing to take huge risks if their ego, if their social status is threatened. So when people feel lied to, they're ready to say, you know what, I don't care if it costs me my career, I'm going to talk about this. This is how I felt when I was on the food pyramid diet for the first 25 years of my life, and I was 110 pounds overweight. And then I came across the keto and carnivore diet because I had always been told by doctors and academics, fat makes you fat, you want to get healthy, have 6 to 11 servings of grams a day. That was so insulting to me to find out the reality of that fabrication that I was beyond furious. And I'm like, oh, people are going to get mad at me, as opposed to what? Or sometimes you can locate how disingenuous people are. So when I had people telling me, oh, Keith, the shot's going to come out soon and you'll be able to get it, right? And I said, you know what? I am so insulted by you people. I don't even know if I want to get it. And I said, why don't you just assume I'm not getting it? Don't let me have it. Because remember, you think the big problem in the world are these climate skeptics, me, people who don't care about the poor, people who don't care about the uneducated. Why don't you just let us die and not take this vaccine? And don't make us have lockdowns or mask mandates. I want you to let us die. The world will be yours. You'll never have to argue with us ignorant, evil racists again. And they're like, we're going to save your life against your will, actually. I go, okay, hold on. How much you either don't really believe it's going to save me, or you don't really believe that I am so evil that I need to be silenced and eradicated.
Okay, so if I was to play devil's advocate,
that's my general theory.
Here's what they've said, is because I've had these conversations, is yeah, but we thought it would stop transmission. And then my second question then became, okay, but if you got the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, the transmission you wouldn't have contracted it anyway because you got the vaccine. Yes, but you know who I had this conversation with who was awesome was Anna Kasparian. I completely forgot. And who did a 180 on it. And she's like, yes, but you know, it was we were told it was filling up the hospitals, and it was stopping schools from opening, and it was stopping civilization from continuing to function and society to come to a screeching halt. And I gave her that. I said, okay, you know what? And she's like, I believed it. That's what I was told, and I believed it. And then she mea culpa'd and said, like, now obviously we see these things weren't true. But I do see what you're saying, Keith. Absolutely.
Let me give you an example from the book about a time that I felt totally insulted. And even though, so this was something Barack Obama did, and it's not like He knows
Did
me.
you used to love him?
And yes.
I did too.
And I took it personally. It's that what was so insulting was that I bought into it and assumed it was true. I felt like such a sucker. I don't want to get the quote wrong, so I'm just going to open it up. So the reason that I open the first chapter with this is just because it really stood out to me. Okay. So do you remember in June of 2016, the Pulse nightclub massacre in Florida? So this would have been June 12th of 2016. There were 49 people killed.
It was a gay nightclub, wasn't it?
3 hostages, correct.
Yes,
so,
I remember.
So the Harvard graduate, sitting president of America, addressed the nation 4 days later. And here's what he said. This was an attack on the LGBT community. Americans were targeted because we're a country that has learned to welcome everyone, no matter who you are or who you love. And hatred toward people because of sexual orientation, regardless of where it comes from, is a betrayal of what's best in us. So I hear this. And I assume, well, this must have been a raging homophobe who went on a homophobic tirade and murdered people.
I mean, I like that quote right now. What's wrong with
it turns out. What's
wrong with that? I like that quote a lot.
There's a way to verify whether or not this is a true statement or a false statement coming from the president. You can look at the general goals of terrorism. It's generally a shortcut to fame and bringing attention to a certain idea, a certain topic. So what we'd want to do is look at the guy's last name was Mateen, Omar Mateen was his name.
Okay.
We want to see what he does when he has the most amount of eyeballs on him. So if he's giving a speech somewhere, we might hear him say, homosexuality is evil. We might hear him say, long live Islam, everyone should be converted. So what did he do when he had the most amount of people listening? It turns out he called 911 while he was in the Pulse nightclub, holding the 53 survivors hostage. Here is a quote from Omar Mateen that night. You have to tell America to stop bombing Syria and Iraq. They are killing a lot of innocent people. What am I to do here when my people are getting killed over there? You get what I'm saying? You need to stop the U.S. airstrikes. They need to stop the U.S. airstrikes, okay? They need to stop the U.S. airstrikes. You have to tell the U.S. government to stop bombing. They are killing too many women. They are killing too many children, okay? I feel the pain of people getting killed in Syria and Iraq. They need to stop bombing Syria and Iraq. The U.S. is collaborating with Russia, and they are killing innocent women and children, okay? The airstrikes need to stop and stop collaborating with Russia, okay? Tell the airstrikes need to stop. You see, now you feel how it is. So this was an attack on Americans that took place as a causal result of blowback terrorism because of the actions of the U.S. government. Barack Obama used his power and prestige to say, bunch of bigotry, and you know who's associated with bigotry? The right wing. So this is a problem for the right wing. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, that year, 2016, 24,000 bombs were dropped on Iraq and Syria that year alone. That is what we're up against. That is why progressivism never sees the state as the actual issue or the initiation of violence against peaceful people as the issue. They always say, see, too much bigotry. We need more DEI training, and that's got to be funded by the government. And every single tragedy is an excuse to justify the growth and power of government. President Bush did this on September 20th of 2001. He said, people are asking why they hate us. They hate us because their leaders are self-appointed, ours are democratically elected. They hate our freedom to disagree and converse with one another. The evidence is overwhelming that bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri would always say sanctions on Iraq through the 90s, support for Israel and their crimes against people in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon were the motivating factors, along with the U.S. occupying Saudi Arabia, which they refer to as the land of two sanctuaries. So in every case, whether it's COVID, whether it's 9/11, whether it's the 2008 recession, anytime there's a crisis, the progressive will say, well, we just need the government, who's not accountable almost at all, to have more money and more power that comes at the expense of people being able to cooperate voluntarily in the free market. So progressivism, my general thesis is that it is a scam that we should see coming 1,000 miles away, just as when you get an email that says, hey, click here and win $10,000. I just need your social security number. We need to be so comfortable with recognizing that scam for what it is. We need to consider progressivism and the growth of government and the neocon wars of aggression as blatant scams that we should recognize on a default basis as being scams to be completely disregarded, whether it's war with Russia, war with Iran, war with China, a justification for locking down. Progressivism and big government is a scam just as much as the Nigerian Prince email is.
Okay, hold on. That's a little, I don't even know where to begin. Okay. So essentially, this is a manipulation under the pretense of do-gooding to trigger people's empathy towards marginalized communities, which is all a ruse to gain more power and control and to get rights and an invasion of privacy and all this crap and wage more war and so on and so forth than people should have is essentially what you're saying just happened.
Correct. The way to test someone's sincerity is to see their dedication to an outcome regardless of the process. So when they say, I want to help the poor, let's grow government. You can say, well, are there any areas where the poor have been helped? Or when the poor have been helped in general, is it coming from government legislation? It's very clear that before the Civil Rights Act, you saw a drastic increase in black incomes and the number of blacks working in high-paid occupations. In the case of Japanese Americans, they went from Franklin Roosevelt's internment camps to equaling the income of whites in 1959, and then having incomes that exceeded whites by 1969 by 33%. The average Japanese income was 33% higher than the average Americans. There was no government plan to make sure the Japanese have higher incomes. There was more of an open immigration policy. But that is one way that we can test someone's theory, is we say, okay, you want to help the poor and your process is to increase the power of government. But we see in the case of Japanese people, they were able to drastically increase their wealth without some of these institutions. In the case of caring about the environment, for the longest time, it was like a threat in the back of the progressive mind that we might have to mandate electric cars if you idiots aren't going to get on board. And now we see them rioting against Tesla's, the greatest contributor to electric cars that there is. So they claim to have the goal, I want to help the environment. But anytime that goal is achieved outside the process of growing the state, they're extremely hostile to it. They tell us, I love education and the government should spend more on education. But they want to constantly regulate Twitter, regulate YouTube. They want to stop people from having school choice. Those are three things immediately which drastically increase the amount of education that people have access to. The left is much bigger on book banning than the right. We can get into that. But when it comes to things that help the poor, it's not government programs. It's companies like Amazon, Uber, Lyft, Walmart. All of those have drastically increased the accessibility of access and services to people at lower income levels than any government program. Look at the decrease in poverty from 1860 to 1960, before there was ever LBJ's War on Poverty, and look at the poverty rate since the implementation of these programs, which cost $1 trillion a year. So, no, I don't think they're sincere, because when they say they have a goal, they only care about the goal being met if it comes along with an increase in state power. They never appreciate it outside of that. Okay. So those are my examples.
Let me push back, because I'm not saying you're wrong. As the temps search your eyes, I get that familiar urge to refresh my closet. But I am done wasting money on trendy pieces that I wear once, which is why I'm obsessed with Quints. The clothes are timeless, elevated, built to last, no insane markup. I'm talking about 100% European linen shorts and dresses that start at just $30. Italian leather platform sandals, luxe swimwear that looks straight off a runway but costs half of what you'd expect. Quint partners directly with top-tier factories, cutting out the middleman so you get designer quality at a price that actually makes sense. And they only work with ethical, responsible manufacturers who care about people and the planet. Personally, I stocked up on the linen tees and the tanks, and believe it or not, a killer summer dress. Occasionally, I do wear dresses. And honestly, it finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. Upgrade your wardrobe at quints.com. Luxury should never mean compromise. Team, Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/Jillian for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/Jillian to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Jillian. Active Skin Repair utilizes a molecule called hypochlorous acid. Now, when you apply it to the skin, the molecule works by mimicking the natural immune response to cleanse, soothe irritation, reduce inflammation, and support healing. Active Skin Repair can be used to treat a wide range of skin issues, including cuts, scrapes, burns, sunburns, diaper rashes, and other types of skin damage. And it's also safe and non-toxic, making it suitable for use on all skin types, all parts of the body, and you can even use it on rosacea, eczema, and acne-prone skin. With over 500,000 happy customers, thousands of 5-star reviews, and ingredients so safe and clean they can be used by the youngest member of the family to the oldest, you now have one simple solution for all of your family's skin health needs. So visit ActiveSkinRepair.com to learn more about Active Skin Repair and to get 20% off your order. Use the code Jillian. Again, that's ActiveSkinRepair.com and the code is Jillian. But if I was watching this and I would say, let me pick, the Department of Education. So, of course, I can't remember the friggin' names of the loans or the grants, but a good friend of mine was brought up in a poor family. And not black, white, just by chance. But regardless, he relied on some of those grants from the Department of Education to get through college. And now he's a very successful guy and he takes care of his family. So it can't all be bullshit. Or like if we were to take Putin, for example. I agree that there were off-ramps here. I tend to go down the rabbit hole and wrap myself in tinfoil on this one. I'm not sure. Did you ever read Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. It was so long ago. John Perkins is the author.
Yes.
And I don't remember the details, so I'll take your word for it.
For example, he essentially talks about how they go into countries around the world that are developing, and they promise, these big global corporations promise to help them. Oh, we're going to build your infrastructure. We're going to like build your entire economy. We're going to make you players on the world stage. We're going to help you access all these resources you have. And then ultimately they default on this loan from the World Bank, which is our tax dollars. So it's like, all right, well, we gave a bunch of tax dollars to Ukraine that went to the military industrial complex, as Scott taught me, to drop bombs. And then the World Bank was like, uh-oh, you guys owe a ton of money. Better lease out that breadbasket farmland. So who comes in? Monsanto, Cargill, ConAgra. And now it's like, what's left? Mineral rights. All right, hand them over. So I'm there, right? I'm like, all right, this has got to be by design. This is ridiculous. We stripped all the resources. We picked them clean like a carcass. Not Americans, in other words, but these monster-sized corporations did this. With that said, Putin just killed a bunch of people at a church on Palm Sunday in broad daylight. And I'm like, all right, this guy's an asshole. I'll be honest, he's a sicko. He's a freak. He's a monster. He's the devil. In other words, I see both sides of it to a certain extent. Or listen, the fact that Netanyahu denied aid into Palestine, I can't even wrap my head around that. I can't, there's no answer to that. Like, you could come back and combat a host of different arguments about why Israel needed, or Netanyahu, because again, I don't think it's Israel. I have a lot of friends who are Israeli and they don't necessarily like Netanyahu. But at the same time, it's like, well, it is in the Hamas charter to kill all Jews and from the river to the sea. And I mean, October 7th was disgusting and I'm anti-Hamas. In other words, long story short, I could see how some of these progressive ideas potentially have a justification. Putin's a monster. October 7th was friggin' disgusting and awful and horrendous, and Hamas is a terror organization, and poor people do need help sometimes. Where's the middle?
Well, that is a great place to start, just invoking empathy. Robert S. McNamara was the Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, and after all his experiences, he was president of the World Bank. He wrote a book, or it was actually a documentary, but he put it into book format called The Fog of War. And he said, the number one lesson of history is to empathize with your enemy. So I think what you're doing is vitally important. He said, this was important because in the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were able to empathize with Nikita Khrushchev when they felt that Castro was going to get overthrown by the CIA. They also felt threatened by nuclear weapons we had in Italy and Turkey. We were able to empathize, and that's what brought the tensions down, and that's what resolved that conflict peacefully. He said in the case of Vietnam, we did not know them well enough to empathize with them. We saw this as Soviet expansion into Vietnam. They saw it as a war for independence against first the Japanese, then the French, and now the Americans. So empathizing is vitally important when it comes to anything political. That's not just some hippy-dippy thing. This is Robert S. McNamara, Secretary of Defense, justifier of mass murder in many instances. So yes, empathizing is vitally important. I think specifying exactly where the line comes down is difficult. The most productive thing we can do is at least make sure we're talking about the same thing. There was a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. His name was Marianne Rothbard. He was a PhD economics professor. And he was asking himself, he goes, what is it? A guy named Robert Nozick from Harvard wrote a book on libertarianism, and libertarianism was growing. He goes, why is it that these people, these libertarians and conservatives and Democrats, they disagree on agricultural subsidies, the environment, minimum wage, the Gulf War, education? They disagree on all these unrelated things. Are people just trying to pick fights with each other? What is the explanation for why they disagree on all these totally different issues? You'd think there'd be a hell of a lot more overlap in all these issues. His conclusion was in a book titled Anatomy of the State. It's a very short pamphlet. And he says, the reason there's so much disagreement is we don't even agree on what the government is. So he goes through a number of theses where someone will say government is us. It's an organization, we vote, and then they're an extension of us. So we are the government. This is Barack Obama's explicit point. He says, people think government's going to take our guns. The government is us. The sitting president said that. Okay, few issues. This means the vast majority of governments throughout history that were not democratic weren't actually governments because they weren't the result of democracy. So Rothbard says that's obviously not the issue. Also, all the atrocities of governments against their own people, well, how could you say that people did this to themselves? So government is obviously not us. He goes, okay, so next theory. Government is when we come together. The world is a dog-eat-dog, every man for himself, competitive area. Government is us coming together and deliberating peacefully. He goes, everything we do is coming together. If you're sitting at your house reading a book alone, you didn't make the book, you didn't manufacture it, you didn't generate your own electricity, you didn't build the chair you're sitting on. We're always cooperating. So government is not the unique cooperating institution in society. Go to your local supermarket. That's cooperation. He goes, what the hell is it that differentiates the state from every other organization in society? The conclusion he came to is when you look at things like taxation, conscription, regulation, and declarations of war, what makes the state a unique institution is it claims a right to initiate violence against non-aggressors on a geographical territory that it hasn't justly acquired through voluntary exchange or original appropriation, and claims the right to issue unilateral obligations on strangers without their consent. So the way we could test this theory is if you tried issuing taxes on someone's income and you said, but I'm producing the Keeping It Real podcast. I'm not just taking your money. I'm going to use it to invest, and I'll spend the money and society will benefit. You would not have a recognized right to issue taxes. Neither would Amazon, neither would Facebook. No, not even the Red Cross could issue them. When it comes to conscription, if you tried to get someone to work for you against their will with the threat of putting them in jail, you would literally be called a kidnapper or an enslaver. Right. You would not be allowed to do that. If you tried declaring war on one of your foes, you would be called a mass murderer. So, in short, Rothbard says, the state is the institution that claims a right to initiate violence against non-aggressors, and it's a recognized right that is a monopoly right. Because if you try to do what the government regularly does, even if you look at this psychopath, Lindsey Graham, he will actively advocate going to war knowing such a thing will result in mass death. If you tried inciting a riot, you would go to jail. But these psychopaths advocate mass death and war, and they get reelected, and their donning
because
campaigns
they do
go
it
up.
under the pretense of protecting the greater good. So hence, that's the concept. It's all bullshit.
Yes, this is why I refer to it as a scam in general. Every now and then, you can find something that seems like a scam that actually is not a scam, and maybe it's a good deal. But that's so rare that you need to be able to recognize scams when you come across them. And when anyone says, I need more power, and I can't allow people to opt out. So it's one thing, every company, every person is constantly saying, I'd like more money to do thus and so. The good thing about that is if you don't like what they're doing, you don't like what they're selling, you can say, no thanks, I'm not going to chip in. I don't want to buy your product. I don't want to buy your service. You don't have the recognized right to do that with the state. If you say, I've seen the schooling system increase in price by 280% adjusted for inflation per student, and I'm not very impressed with the results, so I'm not going to chip in. In Arizona, where I live, the property taxes is how you pay for schools. The state will confiscate your house. I have a case in here, a 94-year-old woman whose name is Geraldine Taylor. The state literally confiscated her house because she didn't chip in. No other organization has the right to do this. If you tried, you would be charged with something like initiating violence against a non-aggressor. So because we don't even agree on the definition of what government is, the stem is broken, so all of the branches end up going in directions that we're not able to harmonize because we don't even agree on the definition of what a state is.
Okay. When I try to navigate differences in opinion with people in my circle that are on the right or the left, the one thing I try to find obviously would be common denominators. We all want to be healthy, right? We just have different ideas of how to get there. We all want, believe it or not, freedom over our person, whether it's you want the abortion or you don't want the COVID shot. You guys are on different sides, but ultimately you want the same freedoms, whether you disagree on what they mean or how to get there. We all want to be financially secure. We all want peace. We all want these things. To me, what I always thought was that the government you vote for is the government you think is going to help you get to that end goal, and everybody just has different ideas of how to achieve the end goal. Do you think that most people at least want the same things, even if they disagree on how to get there?
Yes, I do believe that. And that is a great silver lining in what otherwise is a depressing area to work in politics. So the question is not, what should we have? Because if you ask people, what should we have? Well, people should be educated. People should be healthy. Buildings should be stable. There should be a good amount of competition. The poor should get lifted up. The common response to that is, okay, we agree on that, but how do we do that?
Yep.
That's extremely complex to get to. If you're in a democracy with 350 million people, talking about exactly how to get there, it'd be nice, but it's extremely complex and takes so much information. You could read thousands of books, and you still might not be sure on what the right minimum wage is. So a better way to approach this,
Right, of course.
a better way to approach this is we want the same outcome, people to be healthy. The question is not what should happen. The question is who should decide. When it comes to who is the decision maker, is it people making decisions voluntarily for themselves? Or is it Anthony Fauci, who literally says in March of 2020, people at this point should not be wearing masks, and sometime later says masks should be mandatory and never apologizes and never clarifies. So it's not a question of what do we want. It's a question of who should decide. A government? Should it be families? More or less, it should come down to individual choices. But even individual choices are the result of families, communities, churches, marketers, people who are, good public speakers. That's how public opinion changes and convinces people to do some things and not others. So the question of who is the final decision maker, Jillian, I really think you should invest in this product. I'm going to pressure you. I'm going to beg you. I'm going to show you all the costs and all the benefits. At the end of the day, you should still decide whether it's your education, whether it's your health care, whether it's where you choose to live. I have an example in here of a guy in Los Angeles. Right as I pulled off Sherman Way, there was this homeless camp, and I literally almost cried. It was so sickening. This guy, Elvis Summers, started a organization. The name is escaping me, but he raised $100,000 to build homes for the homeless, which came out to $1,200 each. And he was able to give people low-cost housing. There were locks, there were smoke alarms, there were windows that had alarms built into them. A gentleman, this was under Eric Garcetti, a councilman member, Curran Price, ordered that the homes be confiscated because they weren't up to par. The same logic with the minimum wage. That wage is too low, the job should be outlawed. Their claim was, these houses aren't good enough, the houses should be confiscated. So they're artificially creating a shortage of houses, creating the current homeless problem. I cite a Reason Magazine article with quotes from Elvis Summers on this issue. So again, who should decide? I don't think, council member Curran Price says, I don't think people should be living in houses like this. Okay, offer them an alternative. Invest in companies that build better houses. But shouldn't it be the person who has to decide between sleeping on the street or living in what you think is a crummy house? Shouldn't that be the central focus of who's making the decisions in society? Not a psychopathic council member who doesn't have to bear the cost of someone being homeless. So the question is not what should be done. The question is who should decide.
Is the concept of this book, Domestic Imperialism, that people are utilizing progressivism to manipulate the system? Or is it about what government is the right government?
It's about, well, let me see. I haven't come across the question phrased in such a way. It's a process by which some people attempt to exploit the good nature of other people at large.
Okay.
And
I see.
Don't face accountability.
Because they're in a position of power within the government.
Correct.
Got
and
it.
as bad as they are, as bad as things can get in the voluntary sector, you can choose to opt out of funding places like Blockbuster, Sears, even Kodak cameras. They could be really good, but if you don't like what they're doing, you can still opt out of funding them. In the case of when corporations and governments get together, you do not have that legally recognized right. And that's why it's so dangerous for any person, let alone nefarious people are obvious. But even a good person with good intentions can end up rationalizing the most evil things that we come across. That's why you have Cenk Uygur, who has been on both of our shows, and I like him very much. That's why you see him go from just skipping the fact that AOC got elected into Congress when she did, and now he's not that excited. Even people who we see as really good-natured people, when they're given this unaccountable power, they will abuse it. That is the real lesson of slavery. Progressives will say the lesson of slavery is don't be racist because racism devolves into enslavement and mistreatment. The reality is slavery has existed since at least ancient Mesopotamia. In the Code of Hammurabi and the Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest legal texts known to the human race, there was enslavement. So it's not about skin color. It's about people not being accountable and having no check and balance to the power that they're able to yield. That is the average person will justify murdering people, will justify enslaving people, and they will justify locking down economies and stopping people from going to a funeral of their loved one because, well, they think there's a virus. So it gives a blank check for people to commit evil. That's the problem with progressivism.
God damn. I wonder with slavery though, and I do listen. In fact, Bill Maher has the exact same monologue about this has been going on for the history and these groups enslaved these groups and there's black people enslaved black people, white people enslaved white people. We know. However, this is fresh here in America, and black people were the slaves here in America. And I just had this conversation with a friend the other day about how other marginalized communities have managed to lift themselves up, like you mentioned, the Japanese, and now they're making more money and they were put in internment camps. But they weren't enslaved for friggin' hundreds of years. Like, I gotta give. I haven't walked in those shoes of what it must feel like. And that's the one thing that it's like, I don't want to totally wipe it away. I would feel like it would just be like, oh, good, so we can pretend like this didn't happen because this is uncomfortable. Like we can just say like, get over it because this is uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about it. Even though, by the way, like obviously I've never owned a slave and my grandparents never owned slaves and they were immigrants. Not that should matter. It should rely on the individual. But I worry if we kind of like wipe away all of the good intentions, you kind of give bad people an excuse. Does that make any sense? Like if I wanted to be like, yeah, like these black people need to get over it. It's like, what? Because it sounds good for you for them to get over it because it's uncomfortable for you. So you want them to get over it. Whereas when Candace Owens is like, we need to get over this. Then I'm like, okay, yeah, you handle that. I'll deal with the gays and the, wherever I have a card. But do you see what I mean? Like, I worry that we give people a pass when we wipe the whole being progressive. Like, would we have not gotten gay marriage if we wiped it away? Because that is something we had to fight for.
The president who gay marriage took place, the passage under the Supreme Court, Barack Obama ran on supporting the Defense of Marriage Act. So that was actually a Supreme Court decision. I don't think Obama ran on we're going to legalize gay marriage.
He was anti-first term. And hence that, you're right, Proposition 8.
But notice the difference between gay marriage and confiscating someone's house because it doesn't meet code.
You're right.
In one case, we have a voluntary contract between consenting adults. In another case, we have a third party stopping two consenting adults from engaging in a contract. So this is not to say, progressives are terrible. These are good people who have been tricked, just as anyone who supports, any Republican who is supporting wars of aggression or even tariffs. They were claiming under Joe Biden prices were high prices are bad, and now they're saying, oh, well, just get over it. These are good people who have been tricked. The reason that it's so easy to trick people is because when it comes to politics, they don't really bear the costs. You could have almost any opinion, and it wouldn't change the amount of taxes you paid or the life you would end up living. So you can have a great variety of opinions, and it's not like, someone's going to necessarily put you in jail in a free society for something like that. So when you don't have to bear the cost, it's okay to have, terrible opinions, and the cost of getting informed on opinions takes thousands of hours, and at the end of all that research, you get a 1 in 1 million vote. So why would you work that hard for something you have so little of an impact on? So people end up just defaulting to narratives. So, well, I care about the poor, so I vote Democrat. I want to keep us safe, so I vote Republican. That's another blank check that the state writes us. They say, have any opinion you want. It's too costly to get informed. Even if you were to get informed, there's still people who disagree with you. You have so little effect on the outcome that it's not really worth getting interested in. So people are ignorant, and they go to heuristics like, I care about the poor and I just want to protect us from the Iranians who for 30 years have been 1 year away from getting the nuclear bomb.
All right, tell me the truth. How many different beauty potions do you have sitting on your bathroom counter right now? Because if it's more than just Vibrance Super C Serum, then listen up. Because the ingredients in this one bottle can replace your day creams, eye creams, night creams, neck creams, wrinkle creams, and dark spot reducers. It's made in the U.S. with the highest quality ingredients, including vitamin C, hyaluronic acid, vitamin B5, vitamin E. Super C Serum delivers noticeable results. So simplify your skincare routine. Get a healthier complexion. Minimize wrinkles and age spots with Vibrance. And if you don't find it better than your current skincare, you'll get a full refund. So go to Vibrance.com/Jillian to save up to 37% off, and you get free shipping. That's Vibrance, Vibrance, Vibrance.com/Jillian. In California, though, they are living it here, and they still don't see it. Some do, and the ones that do are leaving. But there's a hell of a lot of people that still don't. And, obviously, like, I grew up in California. We have our main residence in Wyoming now because it's closer to California because my family, friends, and there's, podcast studio, all this stuff is in California still. But it is, like, I love Bill Maher. I think he's brilliant. I think he's a great human being. And he sits down with Gavin Newsom and he just still thinks the guy hung the moon. I'm like, Bill, how? Like, you're living it. It's a disaster here. It's a mess. $70 billion in debt. homelessness on the rise. You lost $24 billion trying to solve the problem, and corruption like he let all the electric companies off the hook for the fires that started. I mean, it's madness. All the things that have gone on in California. You voted for it, and now you're living it. And still, I would say the vast majority haven't actually left the state. What do you think that is? What is that? Even the ones that are like, well, I don't know if the governor could have done anything about the fires. Oh, you don't? I could give you $1 million that he knew that we were going to have 100-mile-an-hour winds 5 days before we had them. Like you could have, and talking to Michael Schellenberger, he's like, we could have borrowed firefighters and police officers. We could have had everything pre-positioned. We could have set up a center of command. Like all these things we could have done to get on it fast, to be on top of it. We had no water in the friggin' Key Reservoir. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We didn't do forestry management, and yet people still let him off the hook. And the friggin' state burns down year after year after year after year, sometimes a couple times a year. They're living it now. Where is the part where they're like, this may not be working for me? Where is that moment?
Well, just because people are living through something and just because they're miserable under certain circumstances or because they're living under it doesn't mean they're necessarily miserable. Even if they are, doesn't mean they're able to draw a causal connection between the policies they vote for and the personalities that they're attracted to. How much of political speeches is discussing political philosophy and economic ideas and genuine reading historical documents? None of it. It's a personality competition, which politics is just too complex for politicians to really run on those specific things because you're trying to attract the average voter. The average voter does not want to hear about agricultural subsidies, so those people get weeded out. So people end up falling in love with a personality type, and the cost of being wrong is so minuscule. Whether I love Newsom or hate him, that won't determine whether he gets elected or not. But if I go from loving him to hating him, that's a big hit to my ego. And I have to say, wow, not only was I wrong to myself, all those Facebook posts that I put up, those were nonsense. This is really it's hard to look wrong in the moment on any one thing. Ask the waiter, did I order this? No, I think I said that. It's hard to admit when you're wrong on a small scale. If it's like, oh, I've been wrong for 20 years, I retract everything. That is really hard for people to do. So there's such a big cost in admitting that you're wrong to your ego and to how you see yourself in the world. And there's not much of a cost with saying, oh yeah, I think that, so right now if I say, I think Trump's doing a good job, that's not going to affect whether Trump wouldn't be like step down or anything. So it makes sense for me to say, oh yeah, I think it's fine. I hope he eventually fixes things. That it doesn't cost anything to say, oh no, I was never wrong. So because people don't have to bear a huge cost, that's one of the main issues you come across with why things don't change. But more importantly, if you get people's money without them having the right to opt out, if there was simply the voluntary principle of saying, you know what, Newsom, we're going to give you all the money you want in the world, so long as people can opt out of funding you. Because we don't believe that people really like you, but they might. And so they can give you all the money. You now are subject to the same rules as all of us. All the companies that have to get money voluntarily. You can get investors. You can start GoFundMe. You can do a Kickstarter. You can do an Indiegogo. Just do that. You're so terrific. You're so brilliant. I'm sure you'll get the money voluntarily. That's totally fine. Once you give people the freedom to opt out, they'll stop finding ridiculous ways to justify all of these things. Imagine if Barack Obama had to get people to voluntarily fund the invasion of Libya and overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi. Right. If they don't bear a cost, they don't have the incentive to provide a better product or service.
God, that is so true. Hey, I was watching the debate that's now famous between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray, and I happen to like both of them. And I actually thought both of them did a good job. And I took things away from both sides and changed my mind in throughout the conversation about different things and had some blind spots I wasn't aware of. Nevertheless, where I fundamentally disagreed on an issue with Douglas Murray is where he's essentially implying that if you're not an expert, right, you don't get to talk about this. And mind you, I would debate whether or not Dave Smith has become an expert on this subject matter at this point. However, right, he's not a historian, whatever you want to say. One point that was just so searingly clear to me, it's like, well, it's my money that's over there. in Gaza killing kids and I don't like it. And Hamas, we're all like, I would imagine any normal human being is against what Hamas did on October 7th, their chart, all of that, but we didn't pay for it. I thought that was super interesting. We would all opt out of killing a bunch of kids in Gaza. Now, nobody wants October 7th either, but my point is, like, you're paying for it. Or do you want to give needles to homeless people in California with your tax dollars? I don't think most people would. I don't. Now, I would pay for a rehab facility. I'd be like, I will pay for that. Rehab, yes. Who's in charge? What's the therapy? Yeah, like who's in charge?
Who makes the decision?
Like, I'll pay for that. A mental health ward. I think there's mental health problems and there's drug addiction. And I think that's what comprises the majority of the homeless population in California. I wouldn't actually personally want to fund the needles, but I don't get that choice. So
the case of Ukraine is just so obvious. It's like, okay, you think that this is a war as the result of NATO expansion, which it obviously is. The Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, said Putin said he wouldn't invade if we promised not to extend NATO. Scott is completely right about this. Even if you disagree, because that's a long case for us to get into with the average person. Why don't you just let me opt out? Even if I'm right, the example I use in a book is, what if there's an organization that produces food, a supermarket? Food is necessary for life. Without food, we starve to death. Does that mean anyone who produces food should get to coerce you into funding it? Or should there be voluntary competition? And something as important as food, a life or death scenario.
I want to fund the small family farm. I don't want to give Cargill a tax, $500 gazillion in tax. We've given these bastards $500 billion over 20 years to grow this poisonous food. Our tax dollars are growing these GMO crops covered in all these pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. I don't want to pay for that. But I'll go to jail if I don't pay for it.
It's like,
what are my choices? Now that I'm extremely upset, solve this problem. Where's the solve? Or am I just meant to like open my eyes here? Are you red pilling me? Which is, God, that's all I needed was another friggin' red pill. But
one of the great lessons that I've learned reading presidential memoirs, and Richard Nixon especially, you can tell that Nixon actually wrote this book as opposed to the other ones which are ghostwritten. One of the most amazing things is how terrified politicians are of general public opinion. Because without general public opinion, it's a really high cost to enforce something that people just hate, that they're just going to disregard. So when it comes to what I'm trying to do here is change general public opinion on basically one thing. The standards you have for people in general don't have double standards for politicians. If I could just take the empathy, the discipline that you have for other people, you can try to win my time over, you can try to win my money over, but you don't have the right to coerce it. If we could simply take the principles we have for every person, company, and organization and extend that to politicians, that is the way that I'm hoping to change general.
What does that look like? Is that getting rid of Citizens United? Like, what is that? Is it changing how we allocate tax dollars? Is it tax law? What does that look like?
It would look like judges enforcing laws against politicians that otherwise would go unpunished. I believe that's how it would.
Insider trading?
Well, yes. So something like that. But the things that I'm thinking of would be anytime that something is supposed to be funded coercively when it comes to, let's say there's another Israel or Ukraine deal. You could have a judge. Well, we know that judges could make any ruling they want. There's so many laws that could be interpreted so many ways.
Yeah.
They tried framing the sitting president for treason. So don't tell me, well, that's not a real law. I'm a lawyer. What they do is they find out what they want to do and then find a legal justification looking through the records. So what judges could start doing is increasing their social status and their popularity among Americans by no longer having double standards for politicians and people alike. So this would almost have to be something like putting Lindsey Graham and Adam Schiff on trial for inciting a war, knowing that it would result in killing innocent human beings. It sounds ridiculous.
Is that why presidents have presidential immunity?
That could be one of many reasons.
Think about that. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Rock.
Well, and President Bush was
and
actually...
they knew that, right?
He was giving a speech to Congress where he specifically said, it's been confirmed that Iraq has purchased yellow cake uranium from Africa. This was the Valerie Plame situation where her husband, Joe Wilson, said, the sitting president just lied to Americans on TV. And that was not punished. Dick Cheney said that, well, it's been pretty well confirmed that Muhammad Atta had connections to Iraqi intelligence in a meeting in Prague or the Czech Republic. It was somewhere in Eastern Europe. That turned out to be fabricated. Rumsfeld, to your point, said they have the WMDs. We know where they are. They're in east, west, north, and south of Tikrit and Baghdad. And this wasn't, not only was it not punished, President Bush is like being friends with Ellen DeGeneres, and he's like now a painter. Cheney is welcome to Jimmy Carter's funeral and all this stuff. And Rumsfeld passed away and was never held accountable. So once the population stops having double standard in their minds, politicians and judges and media pundits will start to be in their incentive to follow what the masses are already telling them. Look, it's not like we needed media legislation for CNN to get better. CNN never got better. What happened was podcasts came onto the scene because the podcasts were filling the void that the people were demanding. I'm using the term demand as in consumer demand. So first the people need to want it, and that's what I'm trying to change with this book. Right. And then something will quench that thirst once people are like, hey, if I did that, I'd be going to jail. Why do you get to do it? If Zelensky is so pro-democracy, why did he skip out his last elections? If the Ukrainians really want to fight, why is there military conscription? Talk about slavery.
Here's the answer. Oh, because it's in the middle of wartime and there's a precedent for this. I'm trying to remember who told me that, but they gave me specific incidents of when we paused on elections due to some war or some sort of disaster. That's the answer.
So that's the justification. Other people have done it historically. That's extremely weak. Let's see if there's anything else undemocratic about what Zelensky's done.
Okay.
Banned the Ukrainian and Russian Orthodox Church from operating. This was a gentleman who went on Tucker Carlson's show. He's the lawyer defending the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They confiscated their property. Vladimir Zelensky had a no-leave policy. Remember, the Soviet Union was evil because they wouldn't let people leave East Germany. That is the policy Zelensky has for men in Ukraine, men ages 18 to 65.
He's grabbing
those
them up
who
off the
can't
street.
leave
I've seen the
are
videos.
conscripted.
Yeah.
So look, forced cotton picking was totally evil and immoral. Forced military service, where you get your limbs blown off and are most likely to die. The Battle of Bakhmut in Ukraine, the average life expectancy, according to NBC, was 4 hours.
Oh my God.
These are the people fighting for democracy. So again, I'm sure Zelensky, I could imagine talking to him when he was an actor and a comedian. You wouldn't say, this is a psycho who wants to dominate people. The problem was he was given a blank check where people had a double standard for his actions.
What I can't do is pretend like he's the bad guy and Putin is a great guy. Putin is a monster. I can't get past Putin being a monster. I wanted all the off-ramps in the world. But the fact that this guy, like, I wanted to try to think, like, maybe you can negotiate with this animal. Maybe there's a way. And then he just killed all these kids on Palm Sunday in broad daylight. Like, I double dog dare you to do something. I was like, oh, man.
So
he's as bad as they say he
question
is
not who's good, Zelensky or Putin. They're both evil.
Okay. I see it.
But what's on the line, people aren't saying you have to work extra hours a week so we could take some of your money and give it to Putin. That's not on the table.
Right.
The question is, we should be giving money to this regime so he could stay in charge in Kiev. How about an innocent example for this? November 15th of 2022, the Associated Press, along with Vladimir Zelensky, came out and said, Russia has bombed Poland. November 15th of 2022. I'm almost positive I have that date right. He said, NATO needs to respond because Poland is a NATO country. And there was like more or less media silence. You can look, this was headline news. No.
Oh, I was like, am I an idiot? I was like, when did this happen?
Secretary of Defense
Lloyd who lives in Poland.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin came out after there was a shocking amount of silence. I literally thought there was going to be a declaration of war because there is Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, and they must all respond.
Right.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin comes out and says, we've looked into this. We've talked to our Polish associates. It turns out this was a Ukrainian defense missile. So we almost got into a war with a nuclear power because Zelensky, along with the Associated Press, got on camera to tell us a fake story about Russia bombed Poland. Imagine if that wouldn't have gotten out. So for all the progressives who say I care about the working class and everything, you have to see the greatest violation of the rights of the working class comes in wartime, and giving politicians this blank check, which they inevitably use to spend on war machines, ends up being the most evil, vicious thing to the most vulnerable people in society. So that's what we're up against, and I'm never excusing anything Putin has done. Putin's a socialist. I'm against socialism, regardless of what variety it comes from.
But he's like the richest man in the world, though, right?
You know,
He's a socialist.
I have no clue how they would measure that. Well, socialism is not about the amount of wealth. So here's something the left is right about.
Socialism is about like everybody's supposed to have the same amount, right? Or like we take from this guy and give to this guy so that you create an equilibrium.
Well, if you look at what socialists actually advocate, they don't say the government should have an equal income to everyone. Bernie Sanders should have the same. They say the state should have a unique power to allocate resources. So if it's about equality, they would say everyone should be able to issue taxes so long as you're helping the poor. What the socialist actually believes in is one state that is run by someone motivated by the well-being of the proletariat, the working class, to have a monopoly right on the distribution of resources.
Okay.
That's much more consistent with what socialists actually advocate, as opposed to equality. And they would also say, well, people in Haiti have the right to steal from Americans because they're poorer, and that would make things more equal. They don't advocate that, thank heavens.
Got it.
So it's not about equality. It's about centralizing control. I was just about to give the left credit for something. Okay. When it comes to being skeptical of the rich, there's a general claim that the rich are only rich because they stole it from the poor. First of all, it's not like the poor had yachts and then the rich took the yachts. What they're saying is there's a general exploitative relationship between the rich and the poor. The one thing the left is right about is that...
not like your neighbor who's rich. Like the global corporations are siphoning off. It's not necessarily income that I think determines whether someone is an exploiter or an exploited person. It's how the money is gotten in the first place. So if someone gets rich from starting a company and they acquire money through investors, through products and services that they sold to people, yes,
I think that's totally legitimate.
I totally agree.
But realize it's not just about being rich, because it has much more to do with consent. Because if we just say, well, the rich are evil, well, how about all the poor rapists, the poor murderers, the poor kidnappers, people, the rape gangs in England? Those aren't a bunch of one percenters. We have to have a theory which holds those people accountable for their actions. And a consistent theory is one that says consent is the root of morality. Thanks to the Me Too movement, did a very good job in bringing consent to the forefront of discussion. So I think it's much more about, okay, a person's rich. Did they get there through following the principle of consent?
Yes, I see.
Or did they use the state to threaten people with being in jail if they don't chip into their endeavors? So the left is right that throughout the vast majority...
Such a great way to clarify that.
And I still
love
haven't gotten to where they're right.
That's amazing. Okay, sorry. But that's really helped me a huge amount to clarify that point. It's like, well, it's not your neighbor, which was such a dumb way of saying it, but that's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you for making that distinction. But please continue.
So throughout the vast majority of human history, the way you amassed large amounts of property, influence, and wealth was through stealing and looting.
Right.
It wasn't until capitalism and the freedom of contract made it so you could exchange value for value and create a network of contracts and relationships where people performed labor in exchange for money, where you couldn't continue to fund the endeavor unless you got customers. So it's the freedom to contract, which is so vitally important. That's what differentiates capitalism from socialism, not large amounts of wealth or property. Look at people like Hugo Chavez or Bernie Sanders or AOC or Nicolas Maduro or Kim Jong-un or Joseph Stalin. They weren't all equal to everyone else.
Right.
What was bad about them is they used violence to achieve their ends. They didn't use a principle of voluntarism. And the good thing is you can still get wealthy, not by just making things billionaires can afford, but people like Steve Jobs made products and services available to the average person. That's how he got wealthy. I used the example of Amazon and Walmart, but Cornelius Vanderbilt in the steamship and railroad industry didn't just make trains only the 1% could ride on. Right. He drastically lowered the cost and increased accessibility to millions of people. This is how Kodak became very popular. I think the guy's name was George Eastman. So when rich people want money, so does everyone else. The question is, what is the process by which they get that money?
Yes,
is it through meeting consumer demand?
Right.
Or is it by coercing people, either directly threatening them or using the state to do something we would not recognize as legitimate if done by anyone else? So for 99% of history, the left is totally right to be skeptical of rich people. The exception is enter capitalism and the freedom for people to get wealthy through voluntary exchanges. And that's the problem that the left doesn't differentiate between. Wealth that's the result of meeting consumer demand and theft.
And then Bernie gets up there and, we're going to tax these rich people. Mind you, the guy, doesn't he have like 3 homes? Doesn't he literally? And AOC sells merch.
Does the government?
I'm like, what?
The poor government only has $6.27 trillion a year. If you confiscated, I have a citation in here from Professor Anthony Davies. He goes, you know what? Let's just confiscate all the wealth from the rich people. Would cover about 9 months of government expenditures. And then where would we be? They've screwed up the $6.2 trillion they spend every year already, but you just need more. And then what are you going to do with this? Show me the plan. It's just so pathetic to say, yeah, we've gotten all they literally sound like the drug addict who has spent their entire family savings and says, well, what I need is some more money. It's like, right. I think I can guess what you're going to spend it on.
What's crazy is people then fight for them to get it. It's like they go after Elon Musk and Doge, and it's like, well, he's not getting richer. He's actually, the stock's gone down because of this. The dealerships I don't think Elon Musk is a saint. I certainly don't know him, and he's got an awful lot of power, and of course it scares me because any individual without much power scares me. Soros scares me, Reid Hoffman scares me. They all friggin' scare me. Bill Gates, all of them. I'm like, oh man, that guy's got way too much money and power. That said, what he's doing doesn't actually scare me. It's like, okay, if he makes a mistake, he doesn't seem opposed to correcting it. Do we hope that they would go a bit slower? Do we hope they could be a bit more surgical? Yes, we do. But it's like, okay, I mean, he's cutting $1 trillion that needs to be cut. And if things are getting cut that shouldn't be cut, for example, with HHS, we've lost too many people who inspect food. Now, obviously, we don't want that. Like, we want you to make sure people don't get listeria or salmonella. Nobody wants that. Elon Musk is not like, I think I know what I want. I want a salmonella outbreak. Like, if there's a mistake, they're going to fix it. But what we do want is to get all this corruption and all this bureaucracy out of HHS. You want to cut it by 15%, and it's all bureaucrats that they're attempting to cut. But people fight for it.
According to the San Francisco Chronicle, Musk cut 80% of the Twitter workforce, and now Twitter. Do you use Twitter?
I only am on X.
10,000 times better than it was previously. Right. So yes, he made these things more efficient. One of the issues people have is claiming that, well, the elites are the problem. There is something throughout history known as the iron law of oligarchy, that in any organization or society, there's an iron law where some people will have a disproportionate amount of power than everyone else. So it's not necessarily that elites themselves are bad. In any society, you're going to have elites. Aristotle was an elite in his society. Okay, right. Genghis Khan was an elite in his. Kim Jong-il is in his today. Javier Milei is an elitist in Argentina. Every society since the beginning of time, a few people have a disproportionate amount of power. What percentage of singers are as successful as Phil Collins or Sting? A very small percentage. Anytime people organize, a few people have a lot more power and influence. So oligarchy is always going to be here. So the progressive or sometimes right-wing claim that the problem is we need to get rid of, Steve Bannon said this, the problem is we're against the elites. There are going to be elites in any society. The question is, what discipline do the elites face? Do they have the market discipline of saying, I want these people's money? How do I get it? I have to create something in exchange for them to give me their money. Right. Or do they have a central bank and a tax base which they could coerce people into? So elites are inevitable. So any war against the elites or the 1% is a fool's errand if there ever was one. But the question is, what discipline should the elites face when fighting for our money and attention? And the example I think that we should have is a free market where we have the right to disassociate from bad elites. I cannot believe Lindsey Graham's an elite in the society I live in. But yes, we need the freedom to disassociate from bad elites to incentivize more of a natural aristocracy, people who are worth admiring.
Keith, there's so much brilliance here. Where do we get the book? Where do we get more from you?
Okay. The progressive is always telling me education should be free. And I said, you know what? At the Libertarian Institute, both of my books are going to be free for PDF download.
That it was. So, I was like, is this really available for free online? Like, because I was researching the book, and it's like, well, you could just read the text. ChatGPT was like, you could read the text of that. I was like, no, this can't be possible.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose money here. I mean,
when Scott, I haven't lost money. A lot of people. I was on Dave Smith's show originally, and that's where the book got some popularity originally. And so I'm still able to make money because there's the physical
This show's going to get silenced like crazy, but I
okay. So Libertarian,
please buy it if you can afford it.
It's $12, so it's like the cost of 3 eggs. So I'm hoping that it's going to be worth it. The Voluntarist Handbook and Domestic Imperialism, free PDFs are at libertarianinstitute.org, along with thousands of articles and blogs and videos and podcasts from all our contributors. Our goal is to create a free educational platform on economics, history, and philosophy and foreign policy. So people can visit our website, use the search engine, type in Winston Churchill, agricultural subsidies, minimum wage, Russia, Ukraine, and they can get an education on those issues. This book more or less took like 15 years to write.
Oh my God.
Because this is 15 years of research. This is a transcript of a speech that I gave at the University Club in Phoenix. I just gathered I went through all my books and said, here are the best points from each of them, and here's what persuaded me. So books like this are 15 years of research, and we want to make it free and easily accessible to the masses to change general public opinion.
Support. It's $12. Because you got to, I mean, the people that can pay should pay.
And if you like the Institute at large, if you like the project Scott and I are working on with all of our contributors, you can make a tax-deductible donation.
Nice. Okay, wait. And podcasts, where are we getting your...
Oh, yes, the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast. I was just telling you I published my 1100th episode called Douglas Murray is Wrong About Winston Churchill. Oh. Go check that out. Yes, Don't Tread on Anyone podcast. You can find it on YouTube or any podcatchers.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And make sure to let me know what guests you want to see on in the future.